Victor. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, AJ. Great to be here.
We are here with Victor, a strategist with United We Dream, and we'll be talking all about Victor, United We Dream, and in general, how can we cultivate solidarity through social media and technology. But before we get into all of that, Victor, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in advocacy.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. First of all, my name is Victor, pronouns him, él. I am the communications and counter-disinformation strategist for United We Dream and United We Dream Action. We are the largest immigrant youth-led network in the country in over 24 states. We represent over 1.2 million members. And yeah, I've been doing this work for quite some time. I think, honestly, my beginnings in advocacy go far back. I am myself an immigrant from Venezuela. And I remember when I was 16 years old, we're going through some issues in the country, especially with like not having basic access to things like food and running water and electricity and public services. And honestly, that's when my advocacy started, kind of just advocating before our local elected officials and city elected officials to make sure that people were able to get access to basic necessities and public services like electricity and just power in their homes. Um, and I think that sort of like started fueling my passion for, representing my communities before powerful stakeholders to make significant change. And I think that's when it all started. I moved to the US when I was 18. And after that, I went from advocating for my own city and like the people in my community to representing a larger group of people, in this case, immigrant communities that no matter where we were from, I'm from Venezuela, but no matter where we were from, we're all united in the same sort of like common experience of what it means to be an immigrant in this country. Um, and that's how my advocacy sort of translated into immigrant rights advocacy here in the US. And I live in Philly right now. So I started at the local level, and little by little, I've been sort of growing in my advocacy, fighting for the rights of our community and people of color more in general.
And I'm not sure if any of that was happening online at the time or if your kind of digital strategy career is more new. But before we even get to that, I'm just curious, like, what has your history been with social media and digital technologies? What is your kind of origin story where you realized, oh, this is actually something I could use for connecting with people politically or otherwise?
Yeah, I think it started back home, honestly. I was really into Twitter at the time. We used to just coordinate and organize and make sure that people like went to the rallies. And so it really started back home, sort of like my passion for using social media as a tool to spread the word, essentially, when it came to like basic things like rallies and, handing out flyers. But then when I came to the US, I remember at that time was trying to get protections for my Venezuelan community because we're going through a deep humanitarian crisis. And there was this thing called TPS, temporary protected status, that at the time seemed like an option for members of my community. And so back then when I was very active, I started, advocating, making sure that people knew that they could call their members of Congress and pressure the administration to pass temporary protected status for Venezuelans. And, um, you know, somehow some of the tweets that I did at that moment like went viral and, started like sharing resources actively. And that actually translated into a lot of people, calling their congressional offices, pressure the administration, tagging the specific members of Congress and the specific, government administrators to do something about it. And that drive actually translated into, temporary protected status being enacted and giving protections to over 500,000 people. So I kind of learned that the power of social media can be a direct, powerful tool to enact change by actually being in the driver's seat of making sure that people knew their rights and knew their power to advocate for their communities and the people they love the most.
That's really powerful. I remember those Twitter days. And around what time was that? Like, where are we in time? Twitter time.
But Twitter time. Yeah, I think like that was honestly, um, it started like 6 months before the Biden administration took over. So I would say, what was that, 2020,
Oh,
midst of the pandemic.
hmm.
And it was really interesting because, we're all locked up at that time. So people had a lot of time, and social media at that time really became sort of like the public squares for policymaking and advocacy and pushing for like important things. And that's also when I went down the rabbit hole with social media, as many people our age did. Um, but in my case, and in the case of many people in our community, we sort of like utilize that power for good, right? We pressured the administration for like or at that moment the campaign for like 6 months straight, trying to like, hey, like make sure that when you add this to your platform, like that is a priority for you. And then one of the first things that the Biden administration did when they got into office was to enact TPS for Venezuela. So yeah, it was a great time and a great win that we accomplished by just honestly advocating really hard through digital organizing and storytelling and sharing our own personal stories about what it would mean for people like myself and people like my closest friends and family.
Yeah, I've been talking to some other folks about Twitter, especially as a platform that allowed regular people to connect to people in power really seamlessly and easily, right? Both directly, but also, like you said, mobilizing people to use those official channels like calling and emailing your representatives. And over the many years, it has been really powerful. Today, maybe not so much. I'm going to ask you about that, but I first want to talk about, when you got invited or involved with United We Dream and what that organization does.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, United We Dream is just the largest immigrant youth-led network in the country. We represent directly impacted young people of color, immigrants who want to, gain permanent protections for their families, for their friends, for themselves. And so we build that power, we build that momentum, we create community for people like ourselves, and we build that power of, immigrant young people and people of color to create action. And obviously, we do that at all levels of government. We advocate for protections at the state level, at the city level, at the county level, at the federal level. And we have gotten major wins and continue to get major wins to protect our communities before or against the relentless attacks that we continue to see against immigrant communities and people of color. I think the work we do is essentially center the voices and the storytelling and the lives, honestly, of the people that are directly impacted by anti-immigrant policies at all levels of government, and really just show people that our stories have value, that our voices have value, and that it is people in our community who are the drivers of our community's thriving. And I think centering our voices has been really critical in the work that we do digitally and the work that we do, on social media and, narrative change more broadly.
Yeah, I have seen that on your Instagram, which is a platform I am on. I'm not on Twitter or X anymore. But on Instagram, it's very clear that you're highlighting like people's stories. Like you have these like kind of video profiles where you're seeing people's actual faces and like who they are and where they come from, and really like humanizing this immigrant experience at a time when people are really being dehumanized, right, in very big and public ways. And you're also kind of not only just sharing stories, but also information. Like there's a lot of just like, this is how you protect yourself. This is how you advocate for yourself in this particular 2025 climate. So yeah, can you tell me like what has been working on social media? Do these strategies work? What approach do you take to them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think really clever storytelling and centering the voices of directly impacted people and directly impacted immigrant communities and young people is our bread and butter. We center those voices, we put them, in the front seat to make sure that we're always showing people that immigrants and immigrant communities are your neighbors, are your classmates, are your coworkers, are your school administrators, your employers, your favorite artists, your favorite local bodega shop owners, right? Um, and I think like something that has really worked for us, like specifically within the context that we're in right now, is making sure that people know their power. Sharing resources like Know Your Rights has been incredibly important right now, in a context and in an environment where knowing your rights and having that information accessible to you could really be what determines whether you stay with your family or not, whether your family gets separated. Um, and so information is power. And for us, the best antidote against disinformation is to spread good information and positive, good immigration stories out there in a media ecosystem where it is very rare to see positive immigration stories that highlight the beauty and the transformative nature of our communities, the people I know, the people I love, and the families that just want to stay together and contribute to their communities and just experience life to the fullest without fear of deportation or family separation.
Yeah, it's like really essential work right now. I'm sure also very busy and stressful for you all because there's a lot going on. And I'm sure you're feeling that your work is very needed. I just love how you talked about how people don't necessarily know that like immigrants are all around them and key to like all of our thriving, right? Like people from other countries have always made this country great. And you just never know what someone's story is. I remember now it was 20 years ago when I was a intern at the Washington Post, and my mentor was Jose Antonio Vargas, who eventually started Define American. And it was like years after my internship that he came out as undocumented. And I was just like, whoa, like my boss, my mentor at the Washington Post, who kind of gave me advice and helped me as a young person of color navigate an institution that wasn't necessarily always hospitable to us, was also someone who was precarious in a way that was completely invisible, but like so very powerful. So I just want to like big ups, like the highlighting of people's stories is so key to like people getting that this is not just an issue. This is people's lives, and this is also like our country and what makes us awesome and great.
Yeah,
Um,
and if I could add very quickly to that, I think like because I think you mentioned something really important, and it's just the fact that stories really contribute to like an overall narrative change. I think people like throw that word around like narrative change, narrative change. Narrative is essentially a set of stories. When many stories are put together, that defines a narrative. And so the more storytelling and positive, in our case, positive immigrant storytelling you push out there, the more you're shaping that narrative. And the more that narrative shapes policies that actually impact people's lives. And so there is like a clear connection there that some people sometimes like I think like dismiss, but like storytelling is at the center of everything, including policy making, rule making, and it could make the difference between ICE knocking on your door or you living a normal life with your family. And so that's sort of like at the center of what we do and what drives our passion.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are in politics, especially, forget that politics is narrative, right? Like all politics is just driving a narrative. And right now we have a very asymmetrical narrative about immigration, where you have a lot of people kind of creating a very demonizing, fearful narrative that is like taken over even mainstream media, to be honest. Like even media that's not necessarily propagandistic is kind of feeding into this narrative that this is a problem. It's like, this isn't a problem of people. This is a problem of systems and how they affect people. And our systems are broken, not people. And this kind of gets me to my next question, talking about problematic systems. What are the challenges that you are facing in the digital environment or in the media environment generally with regards to, expanding the narrative about who belongs in this country?
Yeah, I mean, I think that whether we like it or not, um, anti-immigrant, the anti-immigrant infrastructure, and specifically the anti-immigrant media infrastructure has grown exponentially because they have invested millions of dollars into creating a media ecosystem that demonizes our people, the people in our communities, the people that we love. Um, I think a big part of like the violence that we see, both state and deadly real violence that we've seen against immigrants in our country has come from really well-funded disinformation campaigns that have taken place in many spaces, right? And a good example, for instance, is the anti-immigrant disinformation that has fed the media diet of young men, including young Latino men,
Mhm.
um, that ended up demonizing members of their own community because of
Mhm.
falling right to this disinformation. And so I think our civil rights groups and human rights groups have not been able to respond as quickly as they should have to this threat because it's not new. And I think there's been an over reliance on traditional media outlets that frankly are not the ones that are reaching out to people, right? It is not, even though I think it is important that, NPR posts, good things about immigrants, is not where like young men of color, for instance, are getting radicalized, right? So finding those new media ecosystems where the anti-immigrant groups are honestly thriving, it's something that we have worked really intentionally in, and we have been leading in that space, essentially pioneering and innovating new ways and tactics to reach out to the people that we know are getting radicalized online and that are susceptible to this kind of disinformation, by reaching out to them, identifying where they spend time online, and by creating authentic voices that would speak to them in a way that they would resonate with.
That's awesome. What are the challenges that you face in that work? I'm thinking about, maybe things like algorithms and like the fact that
Hmm.
maybe not everybody is seeing all of your stuff and you've got to try to find like a way around it. Thinking about maybe even content moderation and like, are there certain words or hashtags or things that you all feel like you have to avoid on certain platforms in order to get your message out? Like, what are the kind of barriers to spreading that narrative?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think definitely algorithms play a huge role. They impact people's lives, and tech companies for the longest time have not been held accountable for it. It's not even transparent. It's a black box that people don't fully understand how it works. And legislators have worked very hard to try to open that box and make sure that the public understands how those algorithms work. But it is true that the way that they disseminate information is not public to most people. And something that we have worked, with United We Dream, something that I've worked personally with federal agencies like the FTC, for instance, is trying to make sure that we set up some sort of regulations so their business models stop harming people. Because what is happening right now is that these tech companies are putting profits over people's lives by creating business models that maximize engagement at all costs. And it doesn't matter if the way to maximize engagement is by feeding really harmful, anti-immigrant, xenophobic, and racist lies to people, as long as that maximizes engagement of users and makes you spend more time on their platform, then they will do it. And I think Meta, very famously during 2020, monetized a lot of anti-COVID vaccine misinformation, and even monetize the traffic to white supremacist groups. And I think those are like some very specific examples in which you can really see how it is really critical for us in a tech-dominated world to put some accountability on the very platforms where harmful disinformation is spread about our communities, so we can actually counteract those lies with truthful, positive, authentic information about the people in our communities.
Yeah, I like how you kind of started by identifying that there is a technology, but there's also a technology that's being used in service of a business goal, right? And that in some ways there is a problem with the technology, but there's a problem in how the technology has been designed specifically for this thing called profit, and how we have to think about the business imperatives and the technological capabilities as like two separate but interconnected things. Um, and it makes me think about how much all of our society is just structured by capitalism and consumption, and how in these really subtle, sometimes insidious ways, we end up replicating that model of like extraction and consumption and thinking about each other as brands or objects as opposed to people. And so when I think about like how do we get out of that, um, I wonder, how can we develop other kinds of practices, protocols, or maybe even platforms? Like, what would it mean to even start from scratch to create something that motivates people to share stories and knowledge in a way that does center humanity over profit? I know that's a big question, but I don't know if you've thought about that.
No, but it's a question that has an answer to. And I think, when you really think deeply about what disinformation even is, right? Disinformation is distrust. Right. It's at the center of everything. So what's the antidote to distrust? Is to build trust. And you do that through community, right? I think social media is really good at actually isolating us. And in the isolation, distrust gains momentum, right? And I think there are ways in which, and they already exist right now, in which you can create community online. You can create authentic communities in which you can build that sense of belonging, where you have trusted voices and messengers that can give you good information. And we can already do that with the already existing unchecked and corrupt algorithms and platforms that we have. We have to obviously improve those platforms, so there's more transparency, more accountability, uh, more community feedback from the people who are directly impacted. But we have already proven, because we have entered these spaces already, that there are digital communities that already have their own ethos and their own sort of sense of community and identity, where as long as you're able to intervene them and make sure that good information spread in those community hubs online, then you have a better chance at spreading good information and in many cases counteracting really harmful narratives about real people, like the people in my community and the people that I love. And so I think that's a good practice that I think we should start implementing. And I have a lot of examples of work that we have done in those spaces, but I think that to me is the beginning of the conversation. How to capitalize on already existing communities online that people are seeking to find the community that they're lacking in their overall space.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is in my forthcoming book, I have a definition of community as the group or groups of people to whom we are accountable.
Mm.
Who feel like if you did something, say something, you would have to answer to these people, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like online there are those, like you said, there are people or organizations that people follow and are connected to, who they trust, who they feel like you are accountable to me, right? They're maybe, if you look at like the social networks, they're like the key nodes in the networks who disseminate stories and information, and people trust them to disseminate stories and information that are truthful and life-giving and all the beautiful things. And so I hear you saying like one strategy is to work with and build up those people who are actually trying to be community accountable on these platforms. And I imagine maybe you all do some of that with like working with key individuals on these platforms.
Yeah, I think like a good example of this is our gamer intervention program. So essentially we saw, honestly, back in 2022, we did some research and found that young Latino men, in particular, ages 18 to 35 or so, were spending a significant time, like a big portion of their time online um, in gaming platforms like Twitch and Discord. These platforms, as you may know, are places where there is not a lot of uh, accountability and safe rails for people to not consume this information. So we found that young Latino men in particular were highly susceptible to be fed anti-immigrant disinformation online because they were spending time in those spaces. But at the same time, they were also building a lot of community in those spaces. They were finding friends. They were building genuine relationships and creating their own sort of like code of conduct and ways to relate with one another. And so what we did was we studied those spaces very intentionally and realized that the best way for us to reach out to young Latino men, because we weren't reaching out to them before through our traditional platforms, was to interview spaces. So we thought to ourselves, okay, who are the trusted messengers in these communities that young Latino men are already looking up to? And so we started partnering with Twitch streamers and Discord servers that were already a voice in these communities. And, some people were playing FIFA, some people were playing Fortnite, but the overall theme was that they were trusted messengers in the community. So our sort of theory of change was, if we want to organize these people in these spaces, first we have to organize the trusted messengers that they seek information from in those spaces. And it has to be in a very authentic way in which you know how to communicate with them. It feels organic. It doesn't feel scripted. It doesn't feel like you're pushing something through someone's throat. And it was very effective. In just 3 months, in the most recent iteration that we did last year, we were able to reach out to over 2 million people and actively and continually organize them. And these are people that we weren't able to reach out to before, right? These are people that were not engaged or even consuming our pro-immigrant content at all. So it just kind of tells you that the communities are already there. It's just a matter of being able to reach out to them and speak in a way, in a language that they resonate with. And the anti-immigrant groups are really good at this. The white nationalist groups, like pushing anti-immigrant disinformation and all kinds of horrible disinformation, are already in those spaces doing that work. So our case is to reach out to other people in our movement and be like, hey, we're doing this, it's working. I think we all should start paying attention to the spaces, because the future of the next election, midterm elections, and in 4 years, and what happens at the state and local level depends on us being able to communicate effectively to the people that we are not able to reach out to, and we're not able to engage with our positive stories.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there really is such power in group dynamics, and that can go either way, as you said. Like, it can really be driven towards like hate and division or love and solidarity. It reminds me of a story that I know from a trans guy who has a lot of straight guy friends, and as a trans guy, he's like very feminist and very like interested in gender liberation. And he'll note how in straight guy groups, you might think like there's all this like misogynist and hateful stuff going on, but actually he's like, when you get them out of the group, you realize there's just one guy, maybe two, who are like perpetuating these awful things, and the other guys are just kind of going along because that's the loudest person and they want to feel like they belong, right? Like they want to feel like they're part of something, part of a community that's their friend group. So they don't want to piss off the guy who seems like the loudest or the strongest or whatever. So you're going to the loudest guy who is not an asshole, not a bad person, right? Someone who is loving and saying, hey, why don't you just promote that love message and just make that kind of the terms on which you gather around and like you get together, and it just shifts the whole vibe. There might be people who don't agree, but all of a sudden they're like, well, maybe that this is not the space for that. And then you allow the other people who want to share that the space to be like, oh yeah, like I love immigrants. My family is immigrants. Like immigrants make this country great and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden you're shifting the conversation. It sounds like that's what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like it's so interesting because I mean, obviously, if you are trying to reach out to new people, you have to be comfortable with pissing off some, You have to be comfortable with the tension of some people, pushing back. But that's okay, because if you in that conversation are able to convince a couple of people that you wouldn't have otherwise, then that's a net win for your movement and for your storytelling. And a lot of the Twitch streamers, for instance, that we partner with, were creators that already had some sort of immigrant background. Either they were immigrants themselves, some of them were undocumented and people didn't know, or some of them, their grandparent like immigrated from Mexico or something like that. So the most authentic and easier way for us to sort of like start weaving that narrative of like pro-immigrant love was through just sharing, having the content creators during the streams playing Fortnite, just share, my grandparent immigrated from the Dominican Republic, this and that, right? And we found very creative ways to do this. We had a content creator, Danny Peña, he's great. When the Spider-Man game 2 came out, who had a Latinx Spider-Man, Miles Morales, who is also of Dominican descent. We were like, okay, let's do the stream with Danny Peña, have the hype around, the Spider-Man 2 game, and then just try out the game during the stream while he talks about his own, immigrant heritage, moving to New York as a immigrant from the Dominican Republic. And that stream was great because a lot of people like started sharing their own stories and felt sort of like empowered to share their stories. And I guarantee that these people, after we share them our resources of know your rights, protect your neighbor, push back against these anti-immigrant bills at the local level, we're more prone to do those things because they're already sort of like connected with the storytelling in a deep way through a trusted messenger that they already watch every day, playing streams and doing this kind of thing. So I think that's really important for us to sort of like start like getting out of our comfort zone. I think it's really easy to just stay posting every day on your same social media account, on Instagram or I don't know, Facebook, and get information out to the same audience that you have always had. I think, a way to be disruptive is just continually, get out of your comfort zone and just reach out to the people that traditional organizations don't usually reach out to.
Yeah. A lot of what that sounded like to me was transforming shame into pride. Like in this context, I think it's probably very easy if you have an immigrant background or immigrants in your family to feel like, oh, it's too scary to talk about that in public. And when you feel shame, you're not going to act positively on something, right? But when you're given a space where like you see that people are celebrating things that you would otherwise be shameful about, you all of a sudden are like, well, why am I feeling shame about this? I should maybe be proud about this. And then you feel so much more empowered to do other things. It makes me think of many academic studies and also media examples of, the fact that some of the most homophobic people secretly desire someone of the same sex, right? Or some of the, most racist politicians, you'll find out when it'll come out that they're like secretly looking at porn or looking at other things about other people's culture. Like they actually are hateful about it publicly because they have shame about something that they are or that they love. And all you need to do is shift what is allowed in public conversation and people act differently.
Yep. And I think a lot of the anti-immigrant hate that came from even young Latino men against their own communities was because these anti-immigrant groups were really good at placing shame on people. And when you feel shameful of who you are, then you want to disassociate from who you are and then point the finger at the people being shamed. But that's why what we do is, in terms of collective liberation, is pushing narratives of abundance and collective love and self-care to make sure that we're like, we're undocumented, unafraid, and we love ourselves and we love the people in our community and we are unapologetic about who we are and we're joyful about our experience. And that is a joint experience around the immigrant community. And so for us, that's empowering in itself. Sharing those stories, it's empowering and it affects change in the long term. Sometimes it's hard to see it because narrative change is something that is very abstract, but in the long term, like you said earlier, everything is storytelling. Every hearing that you have at a congressional briefing or whatever is storytelling. Every bill that is passed is storytelling. Every action that passes through executive order is storytelling. It's just a narrative. So understanding that everything is stories, it's helpful for digital organizers that want to create change, but they're also questioning themselves like, hey, is what I'm doing like really worth it? Like, am I really making any change? I think the answer to me is a resounding yes.
Yeah. I love how you mentioned joy, because I think so often, especially in online organizing, when you're talking about very serious issues, you're like, this is serious, take it seriously. And, that there's a space for that, but there's also space for, come join us, it's fun over here. I think and talk a lot about the ways that many communities have thrived and survived so many things throughout history, and it is through joy, right? It is through community gatherings and rituals, whether it be, church or cookouts or what have you. And that makes me want to ask you, do you think about cultural protocols is the word I use, but like community-based practices that guide your work and are things that you do to make sure that your community feels secure in sharing in digital space?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's funny that you mentioned culture because I mean, right now I'm drinking yerba mate, which is, this like ancestral, South American drink that you drink to create community. And so like you like pour the hot water and then like pass it around. And even this space, I feel it's a manifestation of that sort of like cultural space in which we are sort of like opening the space to talk deeply about things in a way that empowers each other. And I try to sort of like translate that spirit to everything I do by centering the conversation around the cultural ancestral practices that we already all have. The example, for instance, is not too long ago, I had to explain to our audiences what Project 2025 was, but I wanted to make it in a really authentic way. So I did it while I was cooking arepas, for instance. It's like, traditional, cuisine from my own country. And to me, as a creator myself, that was helpful because it's a way to, really, it's like an outlet that you use while you're also doing content creation, and you become more authentic, and authenticity also resonates with people better. So all this to say that when I talk about like cultural practices, I always try to encourage people to lean on those things, because the more you lean on them, the more comfortable and safe you feel, and the more authentic your content becomes as a result. And the more authentic your content is, people have a more like a better inclination to hear what you have to say and trust you. Um, so I think like cultural practices are really important, and we do it all the time, right? We try to translate full content that people can consume and understand. And even when it comes to things as serious as knowing your rights in case of an ICE raid, we still try to weave in the cultural power and knowledge and practices that we all have to make sure that people still find joy in rebelling, still find joy in fighting the power and being there for each other and protecting each other. And I think there is real value in that. And it wouldn't be possible if you didn't have those sort of like cultural traditions to like ground you.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And I think that, for viewers listening, if you don't make arepas or, drink yerba mate, you have some cultural practice, no matter who you are. You have at least some ritual that connects you to community, even if it's every week you go on a Twitch channel and you stream a game with somebody else. That is, for you, a ritual practice that connects you to community. And when we tap into that, we can tap into our collective power. I just love all those examples you gave. Really great. So I have two last questions about kind of just thinking about what is one specific thing. It can be a tech feature, it can be a policy, a cultural practice, a design feature that you love about social media and that you use in your everyday life or your work. And what is one thing that you would change to help you see the world as you want it to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, again, like technology and platforms and social media are just tools, and it's up to us to find ways in which we can use them to enable us and empower us, or to disrupt us and break us. And something that I love about social media that I found through our, even our gamer influencer program and the way that we have sort of innovating in that space is that you really can find community. And there are a lot of like design features that enable that. And I will give you the easiest one that comes to my mind is that I recently joined a conversation with Hassan Abi or Hassan Piker during like a Twitch stream. And it was great to see, we're talking about immigrant rights and protecting your community. And the immediate feedback that you have on Twitch, right? When people are just dropping those memes and those emojis and just completely reacted live to what you're saying and giving you like feedback at like, it's a conversation that you're having with millions of people at the same time. And it obviously happens really fast, but because they're already like sort of like codes for like Twitch users, and if you see too many frog emojis, that means something, right? And so like it's just really cool to feel that dynamic that each platform has its own culture, and there are features that enable direct conversation, even if you're talking with millions of people, because a million of people become one in the chat, so to speak. So I think that's really, really cool to be able to just like have a casual conversation with a million people at the same time. But man, like there are a lot of things that I would change about social media for sure. There are a lot of design features that just purposely try to harm people. And like you said, it's design. And it's important to make that distinction, because when I talk about design, I mean harmful things like endless scrolling that just like keeps you hooked, or putting the data privacy settings really hard for you to, or even cancel a subscription. Like, have you ever tried to like cancel a subscription? Has been like super hard. They purposely make those designs harder, create more frictions for you to do things that are good for you, but then make it frictionless for you to fall for disinformation and harmful content and keep getting addicted to like toxic feeds and fall for scams, right? And so there are many design things that I think you can advance legislatively, and we have worked very diligently with elected officials at the state and local level to make sure that happens. But I would say, yeah, there are many design features that I would definitely change. Or could just give you like a whole list of things that I think are wrong. But it's also not up to me. I think it's a larger conversation to be had with obviously experts, but directly impacted families that, have seen the radicalization of their own friends and family. Like I myself have seen the relationships with loved family members that I have been completely disrupted because a lot of people that I love and care about have fallen down the rabbit hole of anti-immigrant disinformation. And it has hurt my relationship with my own family members. So I think it should center the people that get impacted by sort of, the harms of these technologies and the fact that they are so unchecked and unregulated at this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a lot of work to do, but I'm very happy that you're doing some of that work, and it gives me faith and hope that we can get through this and actually end up better at the end of the day. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and for people like listening, I just want to reiterate that this is just the beginning. That as long as we have community, there is hope. When institution fail us, we trust and turn to community, and that's what we're doing. That's what United We Dream is about. I encourage anybody to check us out and to protect the people in your communities, because at the end of the day, that's all we have on and offline.
Ashe.